The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, welcome to the CIECAcast. This is Fred Iantorno, Executive Director of CIECA. Today's presentation has a long title, but it's well worth it. The title is Implementing CIECA Standards, Implementation Guide and Appendix C, BMS, Code Lists and Schema Components. The webinar will be hosted by Chris Poulos, who's a Senior Product Manager at Insurance Auto Auctions. Today you will learn how IAA used CIECA's implementation guide and the IG Appendix C for their implementation. Chris will highlight what businesses need to know about the implementation guide and Appendix C, including the workflow processes, messages and codes, and suggested usage of the messages, aggregates, elements, and codes. A little bit about Chris. Chris is a Senior Product Manager at Insurance Auto Auctions. As an IT professional, he has 30 years of advanced knowledge in application development, business analysis, project management, quality assurance, and operational management. Chris is a lead BSA and project manager on several successful B2B integration projects with insurance companies and their third-party vendors. Processes that he's integrated include vehicle assignments, the reporting of vehicle status updates, along with the delivery of invoice data, supporting documents, and the breakdown of payment remittance details. Chris received CIECA's 2013 Outstanding Dedication Award for salvage and total loss committee work. Today, Chris will highlight what business needs to know about the implementation guides, including the workflow processes. He played a key role in creating these standards and documents and has implemented many of them at IAA. Chris played a key role in creating these standards and has implemented many of them. If we have time at the end, we will answer questions. Please type your questions in the webinar navigation pane. On my screen, it's on the right-hand side, depending on where you have it. But look at it. I'll now turn this over to our presenter, Chris Poulos of Insurance Auto Auctions. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Fred. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak in front of the CIECA membership here and share my knowledges and experiences in working with the CIECA standards and the implementation guides in doing successful implementation of the BMS standards. Fred, can you just go to the next screen?
Yes.
Please. Thank you. So there are two guides that CIECA has. The first one is the XML implementation guide. This is more of a business overview guide. This is a guide that's very consistent across all applications that CIECA has developed standards for. It's divided into some major sections that a business person should try to go through these sections without having to go through the rest of the guide and to get an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish with this integration. The first section is the purpose and scope section. This gives you information about how CIECA is seeing this integration and what is available throughout the process. It also leads into the industry benefits, which the CIECA committee has defined, as well as the benefits identified by the salvage committee. The next major section of this is the process flow. And the process flow for the CIECA implementation guide for salvage is a 15-page process flow that was put together by the committee. It shows 63 data handoff points where data can be handed off for CIECA messages exchange. And it is a good way to get to understand how the flow of the data goes between the salvage provider and the salver. Next page, please. The implementation guide, Appendix C, is a similar document to the appendix guide that we just talked about, and it contains a lot of the same information. It does contain information about the purpose and scope, and it also contains the same workflow that is part of the implementation guide. It also contains additional information on the list of business use cases. Remember I said that there was like 63 business transactions that were identified, or handoffs identified in the original data flow. So this will give you the information on how to go back and forth and what those transactions are in detail. The Appendix C is a huge document, and it contains almost 600 pages of information. So you probably don't want to read that like a book. It's really a reference manual. And as you're going through this, you'll be able to see that there is a high-level process flow, and then it has some general transaction information on the transactions that are being exchanged, and this all ties back to the BMS. For salvage, even though there's 63 data handoff points, there's really only 7 transactions that are being exchanged. The disposition add transaction, which is really an assignment type of transaction, and this is from the salvage provider to the salver. The disposition change transaction, which is another transaction that goes from the salvage provider to the salver. And the disposition cancel are the 3 main messages that a salvage provider would be sending to a salver like IAA. From IAA's point of view, there's really only one transaction, which is the disposition status message. That's part of the normal day-to-day business flow. But that transaction encompasses 30-some plus business functions that we can report back to the salvage provider. The last part of the implementation guide that we're talking about is the invoice and remittance processing. So how do I send invoices from the salver to the salvage provider? How do I give them remittance information on what I'm paying them? And how that data is exchanged is all part of that. Can you go to the next page, please? When you look at the implementation guide for salvage, it's really a list of questions. And if you're a business person, don't go past the list of questions. You can go through and read the list of approximately 70 questions here and go through and identify what business functionality you need to have your IT department implement. So if I'm looking at this now, I look at question 26. How do I send a message to inform the salvage provider that there are changes to the information or added information on their vehicle, or just inventory information on the vehicle? So that's a pretty straightforward question. Is that something that I want? Is that something I need? Is that something that I want my IT team to look into and implement with the salvage provider, or between the salvage provider and the salver? You know, the questions are also flagged for salvage provider questions. Most of them end in SP. So the insurance carrier or the rental company or the fleet company that's providing vehicles, they have questions like this. How does the salvage provider request the vehicle to be placed on hold? So they can go through this, and you can get a very good sense of what functions you need to exchange and you want to highlight need to be built to complete this integration. The nice thing about this process, being an iterative process like this and having several different questions that are broken out in this process, you can start with a subset of the questions, build that out for an MVP, and then continue to add to it as you want to move forward. I would recommend if somebody starts the process, always start with doing the assignment process first. That helps keep the two systems in sync, and it leads to not having as many exception processes where I'm just reporting back as a salver, and on assignments you put manually into my system. Next page, please. Is there something missing from that page, Fred? Oh, there you go. Okay. I'm bringing you back to the process flow, and I wanted to kind of let you see how this all fits together. So the process flow that we have here is part of the hold message process. As you can see that's circled on the top message that's being exchanged. The process flows are all set up with the salver on the left side, the CIECA message being exchanged on the right side, and the salvage provider information on, did I say, the message in the middle and the salvage provider on the right side. Basically, you can look through this and follow the flow. The key thing to notice is that all of our salvage messages contain a reference back to the question that's in the implementation guide. Next slide, please, Fred. So as you're looking at these questions, and you look at that flow, that transaction that's occurring, that transaction is divided up into several parts. The top part of that transaction flow that's described is the action that's occurring. So basically, this one is the salvers notified of vehicles on hold. The next point of that, or the middle piece of that, is the BMS message that's being exchanged. Fred, can you go back, please? Thank you. So 6.2, it's a disposition change request, and it's a status change, and that's basically ties it back to the BMS. It tells you what type of transaction it is, and then there's a note as to what the business reason for that transaction being, why it's in place there. It's the vehicles to be placed on hold with special instructions, and then the user would add handling instructions is what they would want. And then the last piece at the bottom is from the CIECA code list, it's either going to be the salver status code or the salvage provider change code, which is a code list that would be part of those transactions, and then the questions that's associated with the information. So this helps the development team tie back the flow to the table of contents, and then we would go to the transaction next, which would be the next slide, please, Fred. Fred? Thank you. So again, here's the, can you go back one now, Fred, please?
Is this what you want?
No, you're going the wrong, that's the one I want, thank you.
Okay.
So this is part of the implementation guide. There's a section like this for each question. that's in the table of contents. So it contains information about the document type used to identify the transaction, which is a disposition change request. It has a list of the recommended aggregates and elements. At IAA, we use this and we generate a spreadsheet. And we also take that spreadsheet, we put our business rules in there, our database tables where we're getting data from, exchanging, or where we're putting things into, depending on the direction of the question. And so that we have some requirements for our developers to put together. We also have documentation for them. And we also take that question and this piece of documentation that's for question 28, and we'll attach it to our user stories. So that information is there so that people have all of the references that are going back and forth. Next slide, please, Fred. So after going through the listing of fields, then there's an example of the XML transaction that's part of this Appendix C for each question. Some of the common information like party and that has been pulled from it so that we don't, so the document isn't a 1,000-page document, and we don't drive Charlie crazy by asking him to do it a million times. But this is really an example that can be shared with the development team, and so they know what they're building. Usually when we're doing this, we actually go and build it out and fill in all of those missing values to make sure that our developers have a good understanding of what's going on. And it's something that we always exchange with our partner, integration partner, so that we make sure that we're all looking at the same thing and building the same thing. Next slide, please. The most important thing, part of doing this thing, is to make sure that we understand the scope of what's being built. We sit down and we get together and we make sure we have a list of the transactions that we're going to be exchanged. We agree on that list. We agree on the priorities of how we're building that list. We agree on which BMS version that we're using. There's several BMS versions. They come out twice a year, and it's always good if we're both on the same version. The other thing is with the BMS versions and the schema implementation, you can either go with a classic or code extension. Usually at IAA, we've always gone with a code extension, and we just make sure that we're agreeing on those code lists. There are some common admin info aggregates that are in the messages being exchanged. We usually come up with some kind of a standardized plan for how we would do the sender, the receiver, the provider, so that those are consistent across all messages that we're exchanging with an integration partner. Again, we sit down, we build example XMLs that we exchange. We go through our code lists, the CIECA code list, to make sure that we have all of the values that we need in the code list. If there's things missing from the code list, then we go back to the CIECA committees and ask for them to add things to the code list. If there's a transaction that we need, anything that's missing, definitely you have to go back to the CIECA committees to try to go back and get those transactions built. Next slide, please. Usually for myself, when we're building a large project, and I've just got part of my dashboard up here, is we put together a list of the inbound and outbound transactions and that were being built, make sure that we have user stories and put together information on what's the status, whether it's complete, whether it's implemented, when it's due, so that we have a quick view of what we're trying to build and make sure that we're building all of the correct transactions and getting them done in a timely manner with our integration partner. So next slide, Fred. Just wanted to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to present today. It's been a great learning experience being on CIECA committees. It's something that's very good. I would recommend it. 10 years ago, I was new to this industry, and by getting on the CIECA Salvage Committee, I got a chance to not only get a better understanding of what we did at IAA, I also learned a lot about what our partners do, why they do it, and from just listening to the conversation on why something was important to add in the CIECA standards or to not include in the CIECA standards. Thank you, Fred.
Well, thank you, Chris. That was a great presentation. Please join us for our final CIECAcast of 2018, which will be 1 week from today on December 18th. There is a link on the CIECA homepage to register. The CIECAcast will feature Dan Webster, who will be presenting the latest BMS standards release, which is 2018 R2, and its features. Also want to invite you to, and save the date, but also invite you to the CIECA's annual conference, Connects 2019, which will be held on September 16th through the 18th in Charlottesville, Virginia. Please go to the website, and it's CIECAconnects.com. I also want to stress that in addition to the information sessions, there will be a tour of the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, where they crash the cars, and they also have a new facility for the autonomous vehicle, with I think it's 5 acres under tent. So we'll have an afternoon tour of that. So that's one of the other good things. This is one conference you will not want to miss. Thank you for keeping abreast of the CIECA developments. Our standards are built by volunteers from all industry segments. For those that have already contributed to the standards, we thank you. If you have not been involved and would like to participate, please contact Charlie Quirt. As always, the video of this presentation will be available on the CIECA website within 48 hours. Again, thank you, Chris, and thank you, the audience, for participating. Have a great day, and if we don't talk to you next week on the CIECAcast, have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Bye now.